My name is Charles Edel. I'm a senior advisor in the Australia chair here at CSIS. You all have been terrific in kind of marching through the proceedings here today, starting with the overall state of play of how things have evolved in the South China Sea over the past 12 months or so, looking at legal developments. You heard the keynote just now, but now we're going to start to turn over this panel and the next panel really about what the response has been. That is, as we heard in the first session, this is a fluid, dynamic, and evolving situation, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been a fluid, dynamic, and evolving response, starting with the Allied response. So that's really what we're here to look at today. I have a terrific panel up on stage with me. I'm going to introduce them first and then just kick it over to them for opening statements. I'll ask a follow-up question or two, and then over to all of you to see where the conversation will go. So next to me is Saya Kiba, the Associate Professor at Kobe City University of Foreign Studies. She's worked in government as well at the Embassy of Japan in both the Philippines and Thailand. She has experience in multiple parts of the Japanese government because she also has spent time in the Diet. She also now serves as an expert panel to the Ministry of Defense on capacity building in the region. To her right, we have Charmaine Willoughby, Associate Professor at the Department of International Studies at De La Salle University. She's also a non-resident fellow at Carnegie China, the Senior Editor of Asian Politics and Policy, and co-editor of the Journal of the Global South. To her right, we have Beck Strating, Professor of International Relations and Director of La Trobe Asia at La Trobe University. Beck has a wide-ranging series of interests and is the co-author, I should say rather, most recently of Girt by Sea, Reimagining Australia's Security. I note this because we had her on just yesterday evening to do a presentation on the book, which you can check out, and also co-editor of Blue Security Maritime Strategies in the Indo-Pacific. And finally, last, and certainly not least, we have Zach Cooper, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Zach also teaches at Princeton University. I am assured that he is writing a manuscript too, about explaining how militaries change during power shifts. He also serves as chair of the board of Open Technologies. And Zach, of course, has government experience having served previously both at the White House and at the Department of Defense. This is a really robust panel. We're going to get multiple allied perspectives. But really some of the questions that I think that we're looking to probe is how does the evolving situation in the South China Sea look from various allied capitals? How has it infused and changed the domestic debates in those countries? How has it prompted Japanese, Philippine, Australian, and American changes over the last 12 months? Be very curious to hear, too, how you see the alliance architecture evolving further and what we think that effect of such an evolution is likely to be on Beijing. And then finally, what should we be looking for over the next several months, over the next year and beyond? So with that, Sayeb, I turn over to you for your opening comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I have been an audience of this conference for years, but it is my first time to be a speaker. I really appreciate the CSIS and particularly Greg. Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a Filipinologist, and I studied in the Philippines, so I try to be, today I try to speak about Japan, not the Philippines. So the response, Japan's response to the recent incidents and the situation in South China Sea, well, overall, Japanese citizens are getting more supportive to the defense engagement or security cooperation with the Philippines and the Southeast Asian countries. The so-called transparency initiative by the Philippine government is really visualizing what is happening in the Second Thomas Shore. And then even in Japan, almost every 2 weeks, every resupply mission to that shore, we see the incidents, how we see the very vivid video, how the Chinese vessels are hitting and then harassing the Philippine vessels. So the general public is really sympathetic to the situation in the Philippines, and the people are more getting interested in the South China Sea and an entire Indo-Pacific security. Among the policy circle, or about the policymakers in Japan, they are very much interested in cooperating, the defense cooperation or wide security cooperation. So before, the Japan's engagement with Southeast Asia was mainly led by the economic assistance, or official development assistance, ODA. And then for the South China Sea, it was more for the law enforcement to support the Coast Guards. Coast Guard in Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, they are the civilian organizations. So we provided the vessels, the Coast Guard vessels to those countries, and then also provided the capacity buildings. But in the last decade, Japan added more new schemes for security cooperation to Southeast Asia or Indo-Pacific. There are 3 new schemes. The first one is the capacity building by the Japan Self-Defense Forces. So it's a military-to-military engagement for the trainings, invitations, or instructions, etc., or joint learning. The second one is the defense equipment transfer or arms export. It was realized under the Abe administration in 2014, and then now the Japan can export its arms, not the recent ones, not the combat-related ones, but the defense equipment to any other countries. And the third one is official security assistance, or OSA, which is very similar to ODA. It is administered by the Foreign Ministry, not Defense Ministry, but it was to provide some equipment to the military organizations, not civilian organizations. So OSA started last year, and then last year the Japan concluded 4 deals with the 4 countries, the Philippines, Malaysia, Bangladesh, and Fiji, to provide some ISR-related, like surveillance ships or the surveillance radar to those countries. So ideally, the Japan combined those assistance methods, the various assistance menu, to combine the various assistance menu, and then provide more seamless support to Indo-Pacific partners. And then eventually the South China Sea is getting a theater to demonstrate the effectiveness of those new assistance menu by Japan. And that is why the Philippines is catching the eyes and attention in Japanese policymakers, because our arms export, the only case of the successful arms export of Japan is now the Philippines. We have no other cases. A few years ago, Japan decided to export the Mitsubishi air surveillance radar to the Philippines. And then, of course, the Japanese government and the defense industry is trying to export more. But as of now, the Philippines is the only case that accepted our defense equipment transfer. Okay? So that's why everybody is focusing on the Philippines. However, of course, the public opinion in Japan and also the policy circle is diverse. So I'd like to show the 2 diverse opinions. The first one is, of course, the concern of too much securitization of our engagement to ASEAN, because it was led by civilian aid in the past. So among the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, think tank community, there are some voices that, we have to focus more on civilian aid or civilian engagement with Southeast Asia, because we have been, for a long time after the World War II, we have been engaged with Southeast Asia and then faced on the various security needs. When you say security in Southeast Asia, it is not really about, not only the external threat. Many of them talk about the internal security or the non-traditional security. Even in the Philippines, the latest national security strategy, they talk a lot about diversity, biodiversity, or the climate change, or a different kind of security assistance. And then when we conduct the interview or the polls in the Philippines, or in Indonesia, Thailand, many people answers that they have different definition of security, not only the external threat, but also some people talk about the Mindanao peace process is also the security problems, or women, peace and security, cyber security. So the Japan tried to include those kind of various security needs in Southeast Asia. So we have to continue those efforts, not to too much securitize the issues. That's one. The second concern or second opinion is that even though we all understand we have to expand our defense cooperation to the Indo-Pacific partners, our capacity is very limited. And last week, the Japan Self-Defense Forces announced that the JSDF missed the target, the recruitment target, by 50%. So we are facing a severe lack of personnel in Japan Self-Defense Forces. And also, it is not because of the fear of the war in Ukraine, but also a lot of misconduct in the Ministry of Defense, or sexual harassment or power harassment, many misconduct among the Japan Self-Defense Forces. And then we are facing the governance problem of our forces. So with that, it's very difficult to meet the recruitment goal, and then our capacity, Japan's capacity itself is also facing a big problem. So that's the concern. And then regarding the emerging alliance or network or the minilaterals in the region, including the Quad or the US-Japan, Philippines, again, it is dangerous, it is risky to focus too much on the hard security. Okay? So these are the things I'll be watching for the next few months or a year. I have 2 points. The first one is the concerns to ASEAN, okay? The reaction from the ASEAN or the individual state of Southeast Asia to our new emerging bilaterals and minilaterals. ASEAN will never take side, and then so that's already given. And ASEAN is very critical to the Quad or any kind of U.S.-led kind of minilaterals or bilaterals. And then a so-called whataboutism is overspread in the region. I don't want to emphasize the ASEAN divide or the divide among the ASEAN member states, but it's true that they are actually divided, particularly after the incidents in Gaza and Palestine. So we have to be very careful to work with the ASEAN. And then recently, the Japan and the Philippines is getting very close, but we have to explain to the other members of the ASEAN states. And we also have to explain what we are doing with the Philippines to Taiwan, for example, because the surveillance later from Japan to the Philippines will also, take it is also related to the Taiwan strategy. And for a long time, the Japan and ASEAN emphasized the non-security kind of cooperation or trust-based cooperation. So we have to consider the mechanism, how to explain to the ASEAN countries what is going on between the Japan and the Philippines, or what is going on among the Quad countries. Second point is the strategic communication. It's also related to the first point. So earlier this week, Japan and the Philippines concluded the RAA, the Reciprocal Access Agreement. But many foreign media, which interviewed me, actually misunderstood the RAA. Some of them are afraid of it goes to the combat operations. So Japan self-defenses can be deployed to the Philippines for the future combat operation in South China Sea. No, it doesn't. Okay, so RAA is just for the legal protection of the forces. It is not a mutual defense treaty. And actually, I really would like to emphasize here that this RAA discussion between the Philippines and Japan started in 2015, in the previous Philippine administration, Aquino administration, and it was triggered by 2013 big typhoon in the Philippines. Okay? In 2013 typhoons, the Japan Self-Defense Forces deployed 1,000 members to the Philippines, the first ever after the World War II, but they were not protected legally. Okay? And then we have the same experience in 2011 when the earthquake and tsunami hit in Japan. So Canada, US has the state of force agreement, but Canada, South Korea, and Australia came without any legal protection. And so among the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it was already a discussion how to protect the forces for the humanitarian assistance and security, disaster relief, and also for the trainings. So we have to be very careful, communicating with the international community, what that kind of defense cooperation or the legal protection for the defense cooperation is. The Quad is not the alliance. RAA is not alliance. It is not to commit. It is not to commit for the mutual defense. So strategic communication is very important. Otherwise, any unilateral cooperation among the alliance, the U.S. alliance, will be a source of disinformation of somebody else. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just one quick question for you. When you discuss the push and pull between those in the civilian arena, the Coast Guard, and the military now having more skin in the game at this point, I'm just curious, is the military involvement in and with other partners in the region, is that increasing over the last year, and what's the balance of who has the upper hand in Tokyo for this discussion right now?
You mean the military exercises?
Between the military and civilian Coast Guard, about who is running the show for Japan as it looks towards the South China Sea.
Well, it's a combined effort. Of course, there is a coordination among the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Defense, and also the Coast Guard. And in the embassies, for example, the Embassy of Japan in Manila, there are Coast Guard attaché and military attaché, and they're coordinating. So I cannot really identify who are the leading agency or.
You may indeed. I just wanted to highlight that you had said that we now have more of a military involvement than we had seen previously. So that was the thrust of the question. But I think that's a good place to leave it as we tee up the reverse side of this. Charmaine, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. It is an honor to be speaking to you here again. It's the second time that I'm attending the South China Sea Conference, so thank you so much, Greg, and the rest of the CSIS team for everything that you've done in making all of this possible. I have 3 points that I'd like to make in my short remarks for this afternoon. The first is I'd make the argument that Philippine policy on the South China Sea has been pretty much consistent all throughout the years, specifically on the fact that our policy has always been for the protection of our national interest. However, that being said, where we have been inconsistent is in regard to the execution or the implementation of how we are protecting our national interest. I only have to look at the past 2 administrations to highlight the inconsistencies of the execution or implementation of our South China Sea policy. First, if we go back to the Duterte years, the administration of President Duterte from 2016 to 2022, these were the years where our foreign policy was characterized as a quote-unquote a pivot to China. There are, of course, some advantages to President Duterte's policy. First and foremost, it has lowered tensions with China. At the time that President Duterte issued his pivot to China policy was also at the almost at the same time that the arbitration award was handed down. Another advantage of President Duterte's pivot to China policy is that he received his much needed support for his flagship infrastructure program, support coming from China, of course. However, despite these advantages, there have been a lot of disadvantages, a lot of cons. First and foremost, the Philippines has failed to leverage the 2016 arbitration award. Those were lost years for the Philippines. We lost the momentum of leveraging the arbitration award. Another disadvantage of the pivot to China policy of President Duterte was that he minimized the gravity of maritime incidents, especially in regard to what the Chinese militia has done to Filipino fisher folks. So that was a strategy, or that was a policy during the Duterte administration. When he stepped down and President Marcos came to power in 2022, our foreign policy, or our South China Sea policy, has now come to be known as, the transparency approach, where we would call China's actions out. On one hand, this strategy or this approach is good because we are able to shed light on incidents, whereas in the past, during the Duterte administration, we have kept our mouth shut. We've kept mum about all of these maritime incidents. But now under President Marcos, we have been calling out China's actions. And this shed a lot of light on China's gray zone tactics in the West Philippine Sea. However, despite these advantages of calling China out and putting everything out there under the spotlight, there are also disadvantages to this, not least of which is the fact that the transparency approach initiative, however we may like to call it, does not seem to be part of a broader strategy for the Philippines. It simply seems like we are calling China out simply to call China out, but instead of looking at it or using this approach as part of a broader toolkit of mechanisms. Ultimately, however, neither the transparency approach during the Marcos administration nor the pivot to China approach under the Duterte administration, ultimately neither of these have changed the behavior of China. So in that sense, I reiterate my argument that while Philippine policy on the South China Sea has been consistent in terms of protecting our national interests, we have been inconsistent on our execution or implementation of that strategy or approach. That being said, the second major point that I'd like to make in my remarks this afternoon is what the Philippines can do and what the United States can do and what these two countries can do together. First and foremost, for the Philippines, what is very important for us is that we need to craft a specific and explicit strategy, and especially in regard to maritime security and what we need to do about China. This is where we need the Department of National Defense, the National Maritime Council, and the Department of Foreign Affairs to work very, very closely together to craft that specific strategy. My fellow panelists mentioned earlier the national security strategy of the Philippines that included a host of different issues from biodiversity and climate change and health and all of that. All of those things are important, of course, but we need to have a specific policy on maritime security and how to deal with China, considering the geopolitical developments. Once we have been able to craft that specific strategy, the Philippines also needs to have a very particular strategic communication approach. We need to be able to craft a narrative and disseminate that at both the state level and the sub-state level. I mentioned the sub-state level because of the importance of the information ecosystem that's happening in the Philippines. Another Filipino earlier spoke about cognitive warfare, I think is how Jay mentioned it. Cognitive warfare is very, very pervasive in the Philippines because of our reliance on social media and how much we get our news on social media. So the information ecosystem in the Philippines is very important to also use as a platform in disseminating the narrative of the official narrative of the Philippines. For the United States, it's very important for it to maintain its presence in the region. The fact that the U.S. is deepening its network of alliances around the region is very much appreciated. In particular, in the Philippines, the U.S. hopefully will continue to invest in military facilities under the 2014 EDCA. I should mention that these new sites that have been identified under EDCA were used during the most recent iteration of the Balikatan exercises. The third major point that I'd like to make is actually more a list of things that we need to watch out for both the Philippines and the United States. The first is I would like to highlight that President Marcos's State of the Nation address is going to be on July 24th. I mention this not just because this is the President's State of the Nation address, but also because it's been announced this morning that our Vice President, Sara Duterte, who is the daughter of former President Rodrigo Duterte, said that she would not be She would not be participating in the State of the Nation address because she has designated herself as a designated survivor. So she will not be there, but to all of us, this is indicative of the fracturing relationship between the two major families. The second thing that I'd like to highlight that we need to watch out for would be what is going to be happening in the United States in November. A change in administration will have an impact as well on the United States alliances in the region, so it's a wait and see kind of situation. Next year, May 2025, would be the Philippines' midterm elections. Up for grabs are seats in our Congress, so it would be very interesting as well to see how the Duterte family would once again be consolidating its power in local politics. And then finally, one more thing for us to watch out for would be 2026. This is when the Philippines would be assuming chairmanship of ASEAN. We kind of missed the boat last time we were chair because we were not able to leverage the arbitration award under the Duterte administration. So we are, at least I am hoping that the Philippines would be able to leverage the 2016 award and shape the agenda of ASEAN in 2026. So I will stop there and hope that it would jumpstart our discussions later. Thank you.
Okay, one quick follow-up question for you. Taking that you had made the point that beyond the transparency project, you don't see a coherent strategy evolving. So I'm curious how you place things that we've seen over the last couple of years, like increased partnerships, RAA being signed, the upgrade of the facilities. Are those things that you don't see as part of a coherent policy? There are different departments and agencies doing their thing. How do those fit with the transparency project and the overall strategy?
Those results are actually good results, but when I say that there doesn't seem to be a coherent whole in the transparency approach, I mean to say that different agencies within the Philippines are doing their own thing. They're all talking past each other, and it would be useful actually for the Philippines to come out with a united approach on how to deal with maritime security and how to deal with China.
Got it. Thanks very much. Beck.
Is this working? I think it is. Well, thank you so much, Charlie, and thank you to Greg and to CSIS. It's always wonderful to be at this conference and in Washington, DC, especially this week. There's a lot going on in this city. But yes, I'm going to be talking a bit about Australia. And this is the fourth time I've been at this conference talking about Australia in relation to the South China Sea. And Australia has, really been concerned about this area for at least the past decade, particularly interpreting South China's assertions or aggressions in the South China Sea as symbolic of China's regional power ambitions. And that is of concern for Australia as part of Asia. And we've heard a few times today sort of perspectives from countries about the arbitral tribunal ruling, which came down in 2016, and a number of countries were hesitant to really back that in, including the Philippines at the time. But Australia, of course, was very vocal from the start in supporting that ruling. So there's, a sort of a long, consistent concern from Australia about what's going on in the South China Sea. The reason it talks so much about the rules-based order as part of its Indo-Pacific narratives is really, generated by some of those concerns. And it's also jolted Australia out of its sea blindness. And it might seem odd that Australia has been accused of sea blindness, particularly in terms of how its sort of national consciousness, the sorts of things that it commemorates, and its defence planning, given its maritime geography. But the things that are going on in the South China Sea are really, I think, informing Australia's naval capability build-up and defence planning. We see this in the 2023 Defence Strategic Review released last year, and the National Defence Strategy released this year, which really emphasised the importance of Australia's maritime geography. And we also saw that in the release of the independent Surface Combatant Fleet Review this year as well, which recommended increasing the numbers of combatants from 11 to 26, which is a sizable increase in capability. And basically for 50 years, Australia's recognised that we haven't had the naval capabilities required to really take care of our maritime area. There's also, I think, today, Philippines is being the kind of centrepiece of today's discussion, as it should be, given what's going on in the South China Sea. And Australia and Philippine relations have really increased as well, part of this spoke-on-spoke engagement. And there's a range of, activities, military and diplomatic, that are going on in this space. Last year, the relationship was elevated to a strategic partnership. There's been, joint military exercises and patrols in the South China Sea, trilateral patrols with Japan as well, which is quite important. And President Marcos visited Melbourne earlier this year as part of the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit, along with the Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Enrique Manalo, who opened the Maritime Cooperation Forum with Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong, and a number of the speakers we were able to welcome to Melbourne as part of that this year. So this is an important relationship for Australia, and it is, partly to do with what is going on in the South China Sea and how Australia interprets China's activities and assertions. I'd also like to note there's been discussion today about unsafe and unprofessional manoeuvres, and this has affected Australia as well. A number of these incidents now have had Australia as a target, including in May this year when flares were dropped near an Australian helicopter when Australia was conducting a mission related to UN sanctions in the Yellow Sea. So these are, this is of concern to Australia as a member of the region. And the other important dynamic, thinking about how the South China Sea has contributed to Australia's policy, is Australia's membership of the two major strategic minilaterals that have developed over the last couple of years. So Quad and, of course, AUKUS. And AUKUS, this is one of the most significant developments in Australia's defence history. The strategic rationale since September 2021, when it was first announced, has really related to regional stability and deterrence. So this isn't just about protecting Australia's continent, Australia's waters, sea lines of communication. This is about Australia contributing to regional stability and contributing to deterrence in an integrated sense. So in my view, AUKUS is a symbol, really the point where Australia went, we're all in with the United States. The Albanese government has made moves to stabilise relations with China, as it should. That's sensible policy, but that we should not be reading too much into that. This sort of engagement has not altered the fact that Australia is an enthusiastic proponent of US integrated deterrence, that effort to knit together a coalition of regional partners to deter changes to the status quo. I think Australia is probably the most enthusiastic participant in that scheme. But there is a sort of national security discourse at the moment, even though support for AUKUS and, of course, the alliance is strongly bilateral between the two major parties. The discourse at the moment is all about Plan B, and I'm definitely guilty of talking about the need for various Plan Bs. But there's a range of different pillars to this conversation. I mean, they relate to the alliance more generally, as Charmaine mentioned. There is uncertainty about US domestic politics. There's uncertainty about what a returned Trump administration might look like, what this would mean for alliance structures, what this would mean for US commitment and resolve in the region. And there's really two kinds of Plan B here. There's one strand that relates to how Australia might bolster the alliance during a potential Trump administration. So does it need a Plan B to navigate that administration? It seems, from my perspective, very difficult to know what that administration would look like and who might be occupying important positions. So that's all in a bit of a holding pattern, I think, because it's very difficult to interpret what that might look like. But the other strand relates more generally to Australia's dependence on the United States and, trying to develop a Plan B that hedges against dependence by building relations between the other spokes, such as Philippines, Japan, and Korea. There are also a range of Plan B discourses around AUKUS, in particular the risks of its failure. It is, Charlie, you've said, a bet or a gamble in a lot of ways. I want to borrow a statement from Lowy Institute Sam Roggeveen. He said that in Australia there are logistical skeptics, those people that are sceptical about the three countries' ability to pull this off. And then there are strategic skeptics. They're fewer in number, but those are the ones that are not convinced about the strategic rationale, not convinced that nuclear-powered submarines are actually going to alter the naval balance of the power, balance of power in the region all that much, or that they are actually going to increase Australia's security. In fact, some have concerns that AUKUS might decrease Australia's security given China's reactions to it. There's also the questions of, will a Trump administration support AUKUS? Will a Trump administration be willing to provide 3 to 5 Virginia-class submarines? That is part of Pillar 2 of the optimal pathway. There are others who say there is no Plan B. AUKUS must work. Zach, I'd be interested in your views. You've done a tour of Australia, an AUKUS tour recently, and, I find myself not having a Plan B a pretty scary prospect. So there's also a range of Plan B discussions about whether the optimal pathway is optimal. So some alternative visions for what Australia and the other partners should be doing. There are concerns about the UK in particular, that Australia should instead be supported to build Virginia-class submarines in Australia, or Australia should get behind the US's SSNX, or next generation attack submarines. There are others who argue, no, Plan B's on track. We don't need to worry about it. There is a dissonance, I think, between the short-term being on track arguments and the longer-term risks that people are very concerned about. So I think there's, just from my point of view, a number of concerns that I have generally speaking. The first is that in Australia, when we think about getting entangled in conflict in the region, we still focus a lot on Taiwan. And while we've been very concerned about China's assertions in the South China Sea, we haven't really thought about whether or not that might actually entangle us in conflict and what that might look like, at least not so much to my knowledge. And I think we need to be talking a little bit more about that, particularly given what's going on at the Second Thomas Shoal. I'm also very concerned about AUKUS becoming conflated with the alliance more broadly. And at the moment, we talked a bit about this yesterday, Charlie, but we're very, very focused on AUKUS because that's what's happening at the moment. But we can't lose sight of the fact that the alliance is much bigger and broader. It's not just about nuclear-powered submarines. And nuclear-powered submarines are not a silver bullet for the range of maritime security challenges that Australia and all countries in the region face. It is very, very apparent that Australia is much, much more invested in AUKUS than the United States and than the United Kingdom. So we talk about it a lot. And that is to be expected, but it also exposes us to much more risk. And that is something that I think is really coming through the conversations. One of the things that I'm concerned about as well is that as the budget, as the cost of this becomes more apparent, as it moves from being abstract to concrete, we're seeing a decline in public support. So even though you have these strong bilateral, like major parties supporting AUKUS, we can't depend upon the idea that public opinion is going to be behind AUKUS the whole way through, and that could have some consequences, not just for AUKUS, but also for the alliance more generally. I think we need to be conscious of that. And finally, and also personnel, oh my gosh, yes, massive issue for Australia as well. The workforce is probably one of, if not the greatest risk for being able to implement AUKUS and being able to implement its naval capability plans more generally. But the final thing that I wanted to sort of cover off here is, what does success for AUKUS look like? That to me is not really clear. It seems like, when I've asked members of the Navy, including right at the top, what success looks like, it's SSN AUKUS, or nothing. But maybe it's worth actually reevaluating what success for AUKUS might look like, given that there is a long way to go between now and SSN AUKUS. But I'll leave it there.
Great, thanks very much, Beck. Zach, I'm going to hand it right over to you, asking you to be somewhat concise with your comments, just to make sure that we can hit the audience as well.
Charlie was going to say last and least, and then he's cut my time down, so no, I'm just joking.
Don't read anything into it, Zach.
I have a 12-minute statement. No, so I'm just going to make one very brief point, because I think the points that Saya and Charmaine and Beck have made are really critical. What's fascinating about this discussion is, if we'd been having this discussion 10 years ago, it would have looked so different, because the three alliances represented here have just been transformed. And it's remarkable that they've been transformed in one similar way, which is, I think Japan, the Philippines, and Australia are really leading on the alliances, right? Australia is leading on AUKUS. The Philippines is leading on Second Thomas Shoal. The U.S. isn't the one driving the Second Thomas Shoal issue. And I think in the U.S.-Japan alliance, Japan has been leading on a lot of the recent initiatives. And I think that's remarkably healthy. But it does lead us, I think, towards one really difficult tension. And here I'll just focus a little bit on Second Thomas Shoal, because I think it's where this really comes to the fore at the moment, which is that the great thing about not playing such an active leadership role is it helps your allies step up, and it helps with their domestic publics to get them on board. So Ryan Haas has just written a piece in Foreign Affairs suggesting that actually the U.S. shouldn't be so forward-leaning on Second Thomas Shoal, because after all, if China keeps pushing hard, it's going to keep pushing the Philippines towards the United States, and there will be downsides for China in doing so, and therefore the best thing for the U.S. to do is maybe to be quiet and reserved. There's another argument, right, which is that actually the United States should be much more active and supportive in the Philippines at Second Thomas Shoal or elsewhere. And I think this debate is going on right now, both within each of these three alliances, but also within the U.S. government. And look, it should be going on, right? This is a hard question about how to handle a difficult issue like Second Thomas Shoal. But I think what's pretty clear is that the more that China is pushing, the more difficult it is for the United States and for its allies to play this quiet role. And the more that Beijing is pushing Washington into a more forward-leaning role, which frankly is bad for Beijing's interests, and probably is ultimately going to tighten the U.S. alliances, not just with the Philippines, but also, I think, with Japan and Australia. So just the point I want to make here is that I think the U.S. is caught between these two instincts, right? It's so proud that these alliances are maturing in a way that those allies are stepping up and in many ways are now the primary actors in those alliances, which is wonderful. but it wants to make sure that those allies feel confident that the US is going to be there. And of course, worries about Plan B are going to be growing over the next few years, or at least over the next few months. And so I think there is this tough policymaking question in Washington, which is how forward-leaning should we be? And all of us probably end up on a different point on this spectrum. But I think what Eli said just an hour ago is emblematic, right? This desire to show quiet support at the moment, which I think makes a lot of sense. But I think if China keeps pushing, that may not last for too much longer.
Great, thanks very much, Zach. Let me go straight to the floor to see what questions we have, either about any of the individual countries' approaches that we've had on the South China Sea, or one of the questions that I think a number of our speakers have touched on, but maybe following on Zach's comments might be made a little bit more explicit, is as opposed to the Japan, Philippine, or the Australian Philippine, or the US Philippine, what does the constellation of all four of those begin to look like? Where should we expect it to evolve to? What's going to be the push and pull for that tightening alliance mechanism? Sorry, that was me prompting a question. I'd rather go out to the floor. If you have a question, please raise a hand. Otherwise, we'll go straight up. Great. If you could just move to the microphone, it would be great. We're a little short on time, so why don't we take both of your questions at once? Please identify yourself, too.
Hi, thank you for your remarks. My name is Nayan. I'm a journalist. I'm at the Wilson Center right now. China may seem isolated on the South China Sea issue right now from the outside, but if you look at other regional claimants, Malaysia and Vietnam, they have taken more or less a no-hands-off approach. They are not willing to back Philippines explicitly. Don't you think when they are the other stakeholders on this issue, there should be some movement on trying to, if not resolve, but minimize their own overlapping claims and try and present a united front against China on the South China Sea issue? Apart from, of course, whatever you have talked about, deepening alliances system, and in the season of minilaterals, there could be one MVP, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Philippines, and the outside partners, or the regional partners like Japan or Australia and the US could try and encourage that dialogue. Thank you.
Sir.
Hey guys, Reese Bro, China Program at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. My question's for Charmaine. You talked about the deterioration of the Duterte-Marcos alliance. I'm curious to see how you see that impacting Manila's approach to the South China Sea in the next administration. Thanks.
All right. If it's all right, Charmaine, why don't we go to you first, and then we'll kind of go to that first question too about what goes first, the resolution of overlapping disputes or kind of coordinated action.
Sure. Let me go to the Duterte-Marcos question first. Filipinos are also looking at how this drama is going to play out in the next couple of months and years. We are also expecting Vice President Duterte, the daughter, to continue to make her bid for the presidency in the next round of national elections. There are some observations that the Chinese embassy in Manila will once again be looking at all of these developments very, very closely. There's a thread that's looking at, well, another Duterte in the presidency will mean a return to the father's, pivot to China strategy. But of course, all of these are still conjecture at this point. There's a lot of things that we need to still wait and see about. Hopefully things will work themselves out. But considering all of the domestic dynamics that are going on, my personal take is that we will see another swing back to China, because that seems to be what our foreign policy has always been characterized by. In regard to the question about overlapping claims, I do agree with you that in an ideal universe, all of these claimant states would work themselves, work together to strengthen the claim against China. This is where ASEAN would play a very important role. We spoke about ASEAN in previous sessions. ASEAN needs to step up as well to make sure that it is the platform where a lot of these issues are going to be discussed. Lots of reforms that need to be done at the ASEAN level, but it's also hampered by a lot of structural constraints in that sense.
Saya, Beck, and Zach, did you want to add something in on the first question?
Well, I totally agree with Charmaine regarding the overlapped claim. So ASEAN should be, and then if it doesn't really work, the minilaterals or bilaterals among ASEAN can also work. For example, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia have been engaged with the trilateral maritime cooperation for long, and also regarding the Myanmar issue as well, some countries among ASEANs, they took the leadership, and then some other countries are taking the separate approach. So it can be possible, and it's allowed in ASEAN countries.
I think Australia loves a minilateral, so the more the merrier. But I would caution that multilateralism is also important, so minilaterals shouldn't supplant multilateral forums, and particularly in a region where ASEAN continues to be really important. And one of the things that I would say about the second question, I mean, yes, minimising overlapping claims would be ideal, but the other thing about ASEAN is we tend to think a lot about the claimant states, but I just spent some time in Thailand and Cambodia talking to defence officials there, and the South China Sea is kind of not really given that much attention. It's a little alarming given the, part of Southeast Asia, but it's worth, I think, paying more attention to ASEAN countries that are non-claimants as well.
We'll take another.
Charlie, can I just add one really quick point?
No, I think we've determined this, Zach. Go ahead.
So I think it's going to be really hard for the United States with some of the other claimants like Malaysia at the moment, just because of the geopolitical dynamics, right? And we have to recognize as Americans that Gaza is having an effect, not just in the Middle East, but in parts of Southeast Asia. So if you look at polling data in Malaysia and Indonesia and Brunei, you see a really significant effect, which I think is going to limit our ability to shape some of the decisions we're seeing in Southeast Asia over the next few years, which is going to make it more critical that we're working with our friends in engaging other elements of ASEAN that might have a somewhat different view on South China Sea disputes.
I think we have time for one more question, so please.
My question is for Professor Willoughby.
Would you mind identifying yourself, please?
Oh, I'm a US NDU assistant professor, and then Jessie Lee Ellison. My question goes to the Philippine professor, Dr. Willoughby. The question is that since 2023, the Philippines has been planned for former complaint against China again. This time it's about environment damage issues in South China Sea. And then what I know is that they're considering go to either PCA or ICJ. So to me, it's like the Philippines are preparing another legal warfare against China. So my question is, since China talk about a three warfare as their strategy, three warfare is media warfare, psychological warfare, and then legal warfare. So in terms of, but you mentioned in your presentation that China is focused on more like a cognitive warfare against Philippines. So I'd like to know, do you think China's out of these three warfares? And then the Philippines is now preparing legal warfare in the sense. Which out of these three China really focus against Philippines?
Sorry, which of the three?
Legal warfare, media warfare, psychology warfare. That's what China talk about it, three warfares.
So which of the three China would be focusing on?
More like a focus on out of the three against countering Philippine strategy. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
I think it's not a choice of just one amongst the three that you mentioned and what's happening. I think all three actually complement each other, which makes it all the more important for the Philippines to also have a multi-pronged approach and strategy dealing with the South China Sea, the West Philippine Sea, and also what to do with China as a whole. I should also mention that it's slowly coming to light that there's also economic coercion happening. So that ties quite neatly into the information warfare that's happening within the Philippines.
Great. And in 30 seconds or less, I'm going to let you take the question that we have online here, which is, this is from Maritime from RFA. Japan's MOFA said that the official security assistance program will provide aid to 6 countries, including Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. How can this program help these countries counter China's aggression in the South China Sea? You now have 25 seconds to answer that.
It depends, right? Because official security assistance is same as ODA, the official development assistance. It's request-based and it's depend on the negotiation. So the ownership always goes to the partner countries. So if the Indonesia and the Malaysia would like to have some ISR-related capacity, then we can discuss. But we also have a limitation of the budget. If it is too expensive, then it cannot be provided by a grant of official security assistance. It should be a purchase. So it depends on the negotiation. And then I believe that the official security assistance never exclude or make the other countries or escalate the tensions in the region.
That was not 25 seconds, that was about 27 and a half, so that was superlative. If everyone could please join me in thanking our panelists. We'll take a short break and then move to the final panel.